I can hire 100 like you. The Duke of Ashworth threw the words across the stone courtyard like a glove he expected Charlotte Merritt to pick up. She did not flinch. She did not turn. She did not even lift her grey eyes from the ledger in her left hand, the one he had interrupted her in the act of closing. She pressed the covers together with the quiet deliberation of someone sealing a verdict between two boards, and set the ledger down on the stone bench beside her, on top of the spray of wet hawthorn blossom that had blown in from the hedgerow at dawn. "Then I suggest you begin, Your Grace." Her voice was perfectly level. She did not raise it above the courtyard bustle. She did not need to. Everyone had already gone silent. She turned, lifted her skirt just enough to cross the wet flagstones without soaking the hem, and walked toward the staircase that led to the upper hall. The April sun caught her pale gold hair where it had slipped from the pins beneath her worn bonnet, and for a moment she was the brightest thing in the courtyard. Theodore Ravenshaw, 28th Duke of that name, stood in a travelling coat, still smelling of town, the dust of the London road still on his boots, and realized with a physical jolt that he did not yet know what he had just done. His breath caught. The cold stone under his heel felt suddenly loud. "Miss Merritt," he said. She did not stop walking. "Miss Merritt, I spoke in haste." She reached the foot of the staircase, placed her hand on the iron rail, and did not turn her head. Her fingers were quiet on the cold iron. "You spoke in public, Your Grace," she answered. "The word you want is public." Then she climbed. Behind her, Tom Whitby, who owned the cottage whose drainage ditch had been the argument, looked at the Duke with the expression of a man watching a bridge collapse under its own weight. Mrs. Eves, who had come up from the village laundry to complain about the millstream, crossed her arms and waited. Young Foster, 16, terrified of the Duke and besotted with Miss Merritt, stood holding the mare's bridle and forgot, for a full 15 seconds, how to breathe. The smell of the morning rose around them in layers. Wet stone, damp hawthorn, horse sweat, the faint, far scent of peat smoke drifting off the village chimneys. "Go about your work," the Duke said, with the flatness of a man stripping wallpaper from a wall. No one moved. Tom Whitby coughed and began a sentence about the ditch. The Duke cut him off to say the ditch could wait, and Tom, with the grim civility of a Dorset smallholder who had watched 6 spring rains wash his seedlings into the lower field, answered that the ditch had been waiting for 5 weeks, and Miss Merritt had only just been telling him who would come to cut it on Thursday. The Duke looked at Tom Whitby. He looked at the staircase. Empty. He looked at the ledger on the stone bench, the hawthorn blossom beneath it, the rainwater beading on its cover. He asked who was to come on Thursday. Tom Whitby shrugged and said Miss Merritt had known. He had not asked, only trusted her to know. That, the Duke thought, was the worst sentence he had heard in a 12-hour ride home. He walked to the bench and lifted the ledger. The hawthorn petals fell away. Beneath his thumb, the pages opened to the most recent entry, written in a clean copperplate hand he had not yet learned to recognize as hers. Thursday, 13th April. Drainage at Whitby's, 3 acres. Samuel Jakes and 2 boys from the Coombe. Agreed 12 shillings. He turned a page. He turned another. The handwriting did not change. 30 pages marched back from March to mid-December in a hand that was not his father's, not old Merritt's, not the absentee steward Price who had lately taken himself away to Bath, with the accounts under one arm and a bottle under the other. Charlotte Merritt's hand, page after page, running the estate. "Oh," said the Duke of Ashworth, aloud, to no one in particular. He closed the ledger and held it against his chest, the way a man holds a thing he has been entrusted with and nearly broken. Then he followed her up the stairs. Her room was on the east corridor, above the still room, the smallest of the family bedrooms, the one where a grown daughter might sleep if the house had been unexpectedly crowded. He had never been inside it in his life. The door was already half open. Through the gap, He could see Miss Charlotte Merritt pulling a leather-strapped valise out from under the window seat with the efficient motion of a woman who had always known exactly where it was. The room smelled of beeswax and lavender and, very faintly, of ink. The wood of the door frame was warm under his hand, the iron latch cold. A soft breath of air moved the white muslin at the window. "There is a timetable," she said, without looking up, folding a grey-blue travelling cloak over her arm. "Of the tenancies. In the green ledger, second drawer of the writing desk in the library. The page marked April has every obligation I have made in your name for the next fortnight, so that whichever of the 100 you hire will not have to begin in darkness. I have written the gardener's wages for May into the book, because May is the difficult month." She folded the cloak and set it into the valise. "I have left the letter to Mr. Pembroke unsealed, because you may wish to adjust the terms. Do not adjust the terms. Mr. Pembroke will take £30 in July and nothing before it, and if you press him, he will write to his cousin at the bank." She reached past him, not near him, past him, for a small writing case on the shelf above the door. "Miss Merritt, stop." She did not stop. She took down a smaller book, bound in dark blue cloth, turned it over in her hand, considered it, and then, with what the Duke afterwards realized was the single cruelest thing she did to him that morning, set it carefully on the bed rather than into her valise. Left it for him. "Her Grace's medication schedule," she said. "Your mother does not take the drops in the evening, only at 11 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, and she will tell you she does not need them. She is wrong. 3 drops only. If you give her 4, she will be giddy at supper. If you give her 2, she will sleep badly and be sharp in the morning. Mrs. Gray, her maid, knows, but will not argue with her. You will have to argue with her. I am sorry." He stepped further into the room. "Miss Merritt." "There is a letter from your cousin Arthur," she said, fastening the valise. "In the desk. I have not opened it." "Miss Merritt, for the love of—" "Please do not use God in this room," she said, in the same level tone. "It has been a quiet room. I would like to leave it quiet." She picked up the valise. The leather creaked, a long, low sound in the quiet room. It was heavier than she looked capable of lifting cleanly, and she lifted it cleanly. She turned and found that the Duke of Ashworth was standing exactly in her doorway, one hand on each side of the jamb. His knuckles were white against the dark wood. He was broad enough to fill it. He had not meant to, but he had. He looked, in that moment, less like a peer of the realm than like a man who had walked into his own hall and found the roof caving in. A bead of sweat stood at his temple. "Your Grace, you are in my way." "I am. I would like to pass." "I know." "Step aside." "Miss Merritt," he said, and swallowed. "I cannot." Her grey eyes, which until this moment had held the flat, level quality of a surveyor's plumb line, lifted to his for the first time since he had ridden into the courtyard. They were clear. They were not angry. That was the thing he would remember afterwards. She was not angry. Her face was quiet and absolutely without pity. "You cannot," she repeated. "Or you will not." "I will not." "Then I suggest you begin hiring. 100. And I will wait in this room until they arrive, since you have decided they are interchangeable with me." He closed his eyes briefly. Down the passage he could hear the soft tread of Mrs. Gray, his mother's maid, coming towards the nursery end of the corridor. In a minute Mrs. Gray would pass this doorway and see the Duke of Ashworth blocking a servant's threshold with the pose of a man about to beg, and by sundown half the household would know it. He thought about stepping aside. He did not step aside. "You will go downstairs," he said, his voice very low, "and you will read the ledger back to me in the library, and you will explain to me exactly how much of my estate you have been running without telling me, and then you will decide whether to stay or whether to leave. I will not prevent you, but I will not allow you to leave in this hour, in this temper, Mine, not yours, because I spoke a sentence I already regret. Your regret, she said, does not employ me. Move. He did not move. She set the valise down, slowly, between her feet, with the precision of a woman putting down a weapon she was not quite ready to give up yet. Then she walked past him. Not past, through. She walked as though he were not there. He felt her sleeve brush his. He felt the faint damp of hawthorn on her hem graze his boot. He did not move. She did not touch him. And she went, not through the door, but to the window. She opened it. Spring air came in, bright and grassy, carrying the particular smell of a Dorset April. Cold rain lifting, new earth, the faint old rose sweetness of the hedge below. A gust of wind stirred the loose hair at her temple. She put one hand on the sill. The stone was cold under her fingers, rough with lichen at the corner. It was a drop of perhaps 9 feet to the kitchen garden wall, from which any sensible person could swing another 5 feet to the grass. She had been looking out of this window for 3 years. She had measured it. He saw her measure it now, for the first time in front of him, with the cool attention of a builder assessing a beam. Miss Merritt? His voice was not steady. For the love of reason, do not. Move from the door, Your Grace. You will fall. I will not. You will turn an ankle. Then I shall limp. Charlotte. The name stopped her. He had not meant to say it. He had meant to say Miss Merritt. He had said Charlotte. He had not had the right to use her Christian name, never, not once in 3 years, and he had used it now because he had run out of names that meant anything to her. She stood very still, with her hand on the sill, the April light catching the side of her face. She did not look at him. That, she said, is not the name you pay. I know. Move from the door. He moved from the door. She did not climb out of the window. She closed it. The brass fitting clicked, small, sharp, bright in the quiet air. She picked up her valise and walked past him again, and this time he felt nothing. Because she had carried herself past him the way a ship passes a rock it does not mean to strike. She went down the east corridor toward the gallery stairs. The Duke of Ashworth stood in the threshold of a bedroom he had never entered, holding a ledger bound in brown leather, and did not, for the space of perhaps 8 seconds, understand where he was. Then he thought, the stable yard. She will want a horse. He went after her. In the stable yard, the sky had begun to grey over. The morning's clean April sun was thickening into one of those noon-coloured Dorset afternoons that would drop rain by 3. The smell of hot iron drifted from the forge, mixing with damp straw and the sharp tang of polished leather. Foster, who had at some point been sent in for his midday bread, was just now coming back across the cobbles with the heel of it in his hand. He saw Miss Merritt first. Valise, travelling cloak folded in her arm, the particular set of her shoulders, and dropped the bread. Foster stammered her title. She, very simply, asked for the grey mare. Now, please. And a pillion, if Tom Whitby was still in the yard. She would not take a groom. Foster tried to protest about the Duke, and she answered, level as a carpenter's line, that the Duke had given no order to prevent it. Please, Foster. Foster looked past her. The Duke had come out of the side door of the east wing and was standing at the far end of the yard, with his travelling coat still on, and the ledger still under his arm. He had the look of a man who had been climbing stairs too quickly, not from exertion, but from having run out of a certain kind of breath. The Duke told Foster the mare stayed. Miss Merritt told Foster the mare went. Foster dropped the bread again. He had not picked it up from the first fall. Charlotte turned on the Duke. Do not do this in front of the boy. Then do not ask him to do it in front of me. He is not being asked to do anything. He is being asked to saddle a horse. For a woman who is leaving her post. For a woman who has been dismissed from it. You have not been dismissed. I can hire 100 like you, she quoted, with the same level voice she had used in the courtyard, a voice stripped of any heat whatsoever. "Your Grace, I did not mishear the sentence. Neither did Foster. Neither did Mrs. Eves. Neither did Tom Whitby, who came here about a drainage ditch and has apparently stayed to witness the unmaking of Ashworth by its own Duke." He deserved that, he thought. He took it, the way a man takes a fist when he has earned it. "Foster," he said, without looking at Foster. "Go and find Mr. Harben and ask him whether Thursday's labour for the Whitby ditch has been arranged." "Aye, Your Grace." Foster walked into the stable in 5 long strides and disappeared. The Duke and Miss Merritt stood in the cobbled yard, 30 feet apart, with the thickening sky overhead. 30 minutes, said the Duke. For what? 30 minutes, that is what I ask. In the library. You will read the ledger back to me, and you will explain to me what I have not seen. At the end of 30 minutes, if you still wish to take the grey mare and go, Foster will saddle her. I will saddle her myself, if it comes to that. I will not stop you. I will not stand in any door. I swear it, on the only thing I have any right to swear on, which is, at this moment, not very much. Charlotte Merritt studied him. 30 minutes, she said. No more. If I walk out of the library, I ride, and you will not say my Christian name again until I give you permission. Agreed. Agreed. She picked up her valise and walked past him into the manor. The library at Ashworth was the largest room on the ground floor, 2 stories high, with tall eastern windows that caught the morning light and held it until noon. The air smelled of old leather and wood smoke, and the faint bitter dust of vellum. Theodore had been in and out of it for 28 years, but mostly out. Other men had truly lived in it, his father most of all, and after his father was laid to rest, old Edmund Merritt, who had sat at the long oak desk until a cold took him in December 1813, and, apparently, Charlotte Merritt, who had been, until this hour, the steward's daughter. She set her valise down inside the door. She did not take off her travelling cloak. She walked to the long oak desk, opened the second drawer on the left, and lifted out the green ledger. She opened it to the ribbon. She turned it so that it faced him across the desk. Begin wherever you like, she said. I will read whatever you point to. He pointed at the first entry under her finger. This one. 16th of January. Mr. Pembroke of Thorn Cross called to discuss a short loan of £60 against the spring barley. Advanced 40, to be repaid in July at no interest, on the condition that his son, Robert, take the keeper's cottage at Michaelmas at reduced rent in exchange for patrol of the South Covert. Signed C.M. With the note, tell his Grace when he returns if he will see me. He did not see me. He did not see you, Theodore repeated, with an effort of voice. You were in London, Your Grace. You returned in February for 2 days. You saw Mr. Price, the new steward. You did not see me. Theodore set the ledger down and braced his hands on the edge of the desk. The oak was warm under his palms, polished soft by 2 generations of his father's hands. He walked to the window and put his forehead, for just a moment, against the cold pane, the way he had seen men do in the first quiet minute after a battle they had lost. The glass was damp with his breath. Then he straightened and came back. Go on, Charlotte read. 23rd of January. Mrs. Gray to apothecary. 29th. Drainage flagged. 2nd of February. Price discovered not in residence. Accounts recovered in Bath. 12th of February. Letter to London. 14th. Second letter. 8th of March. 3rd. 11th of March. Reply. A new steward by Lady Day. No man came. Enough, he said. She stopped. She folded her hands on the open ledger. You said read it back to you. I did. I apologize. Enough. He sat down in his father's chair at the head of the desk, because if he did not sit, He thought he might not be able to continue standing. The chair was tall and carved. It had been too large for every Duke of Ashworth for 4 generations, and it was, at last, being occupied by the man it should humble. It humbled him adequately. "The letter from my cousin Arthur," he said. "You know what it is." "I can guess." "What do you guess?" She looked at him with the clear grey eyes that had not yet, at any point in the morning, given him mercy. "I guess that your cousin Arthur, who has been in correspondence with her Grace your mother since the funeral, has written to you offering to take over the running of Ashworth on your behalf while you remain in town. I guess that he makes the case that Ashworth requires a resident steward of quality, which he would provide as family, not as employee. I guess that if you accept, you will not need 100 of me. You will need none of me. 1 cousin Arthur will suffice, and he will do in 6 months what Mr. Price did in 3. Which was? Poured it into the ground and then sold the ground. Theodore looked at her. He looked at the ledger. He picked it up, closed it, and set it down on top of a much larger brown book beside his father's old paperweight. 30 minutes are not up, Miss Merritt. But I am going to ask you a question now, and I will accept whatever answer you give. Do you want to continue running this estate? There was a silence. It was not long. It was perhaps 8 seconds. And Charlotte Merritt did the Duke of Ashworth the largest courtesy of his life. She took the question seriously. "No," she said. He had braced for no. He had not braced for what followed it. "No, Your Grace. I've been running it for 4 months for no reason except that there was no one else, and I have done the work of a steward without the title or the authority or the salary of one. I do not want to continue in the role I have occupied since January, but I am not leaving either." He looked up. "I am not leaving," she said, "because my father lies in the churchyard beside yours, and because my mother lies beside him, and because the Whitby cottage has a ditch in it that is not yet cut, and because your mother takes 3 drops at 11 and 3 drops at 4, and she is 61 years old, and she has been, for most of this winter, quietly terrified. I will not leave Ashworth in an hour of temper, yours or mine. If I leave carefully, and not today." They would sit down in this room now, she said, and agree on the terms under which she would remain for the next 6 months. Not as a steward without authority, under terms which she would set and which he would accept, or under which she would still ride out on the grey mare. "Set them." She sat down opposite him at the desk. She put her hands together on the green ledger. Her terms fell in a measured line, the way survey pins are driven into soft ground. She would be named, in writing, Factor of Ashworth. Not steward, Factor, with signing authority alone on matters below £200, and with joint signature above. She would move out of the east corridor into the south guest wing, and she would eat at the house table with the Dowager whenever the Dowager dined below. For the duration of the 6 months, he would address her as Miss Merritt in company, and not at all in private. That afternoon, he would ride alone to Tom Whitby's cottage, and tell Tom himself that Samuel Jakes would be paid from the Duke's hand, not Charlotte's. "And you will never, while I remain in the house, begin any sentence near me with the phrase, 'I can hire.'" "Agreed," he said, "to every one of them." She rose. "Though I do not mean to hire another." "You do not know yet what you mean," she said, and he could not honestly disagree. She walked to the door. "One last thing, Your Grace." "Yes?" "Do not eat breakfast in the saddle. Your mother worries." Then she picked up the valise and went out. The Duke of Ashworth sat for a long minute in his father's chair. Then he laughed, one short, astonished sound, and dropped his head into his hands, and did not raise it for another minute. And when he did, he picked up the ledger, opened the letter from his cousin Arthur with his own letter opener, read 4 lines of it, and threw it into the fire without reading the 5th. 3 days later, the weather broke, and so did the visitor. The Dowager Duchess of Ashworth travelled in the closed travelling chariot her late husband had bought her in 1798, a vehicle so sprung and so pillowed that it was said she could sleep through a county in it, and frequently had. She arrived, therefore, at Ashworth Gate on the Thursday afternoon without having announced herself. She descended in the forecourt in a travelling pelisse of deep plum silk over a black lace-trimmed gown, as though she had risen that morning in Mayfair purely to appear before her son in the pose of a question. Her hair was the colour of polished pewter, and entirely her own. Her eyes were the same amber brown as her son's. Her voice, when she used it on servants, was a precisely tuned instrument, a semitone above warmth, a semitone below ice. She instructed Mrs. Parish, the housekeeper, that she would want her room, that the Duke was to be informed his mother had arrived, but no one was to be sent to fetch him, and that she would come down to tea at 5. She tugged the plum silk of her pelisse into better order, then paused and asked, almost idly, whose valise was that at the head of the south guest corridor? Mrs. Parish, who had been housekeeper at Ashworth for 18 years, coughed and said it belonged to Miss Merritt. The late Miss Merritt's daughter, the Dowager observed, had taken a guest room. Yes, Your Grace, Mrs. Parish confirmed, at His Grace's direction. Ah, said the Dowager, smiling at no one in particular. And 5 o'clock then, Parish? At 5 o'clock, Theodore came into the small drawing-room, the one his mother had insisted on keeping decorated in yellow, watered silk she had chosen in 1802, and found his mother seated and Charlotte Merritt standing. Charlotte was in a plain, dark blue wool day dress with a collar of fine white lawn, and her pale gold hair was pinned up off her neck. She was not sitting, because the Dowager had not invited her to. Mother, you are here a week early. I am here exactly on time. Miss Merritt has been most patient. I asked her to join me for tea. That was kind of you, Mamma. It was not kind, said the Dowager. It was curious. Sit down, Theodore. You look as though you have been riding. I have been riding. Yes, do stop doing that before tea. Miss Merritt, do please sit. Charlotte sat, with absolute composure, on a yellow silk chair she had probably never been invited to sit on in her life. She did not look at Theodore. She looked at his mother. Miss Merritt tells me, said the Dowager, pouring, that she is in some new office in this house. She is the factor of the estate, Mamma. The factor? The Dowager lifted her eyebrows. A new word, I think. It is a Scotch word, Your Grace, said Charlotte, and an old one. It describes a person who manages an estate on behalf of its owner and who signs in the owner's stead. How interesting. Milk, Miss Merritt. Sugar. Lemon. No, Your Grace, thank you. Plain. Plain, the Dowager repeated. A plain taste. A new office. A guest room in the south corridor. Mamma, I am making conversation, Theodore. You have ridden in. I am making conversation with Miss Merritt, because you are damp. Your Grace, said Charlotte, with the clean, level voice Theodore had by now learned to respect. I am happy to explain my position in this house. I am perhaps better placed than His Grace to do so, as I am the one occupying it. Please do. Charlotte described it in 4 sentences, without ornament. Management since the previous Duke's passing, continuation through her father's, no steward, so the work. Monday morning, a signed agreement in the library. These are the terms of my employment. They are in writing. On Monday morning, I am told, my son shouted at you in the courtyard in front of the whole establishment. Yes, Your Grace. And on Monday afternoon he signed a document appointing you factor of the estate. Yes, Your Grace. An interesting sequence of events. Miss Merritt, do you find the circumstances of your new appointment unusual? Charlotte considered her cup. She did not drink from it. I find, Your Grace, but the work is the same as the work I have been doing since my father was laid to rest. What has changed is the authority attached to it. An estate run by a woman whose position is unclear is a less stable estate than one run by a woman whose position is written down. How practical, Miss Merritt. I was raised by Edmund Merritt, Your Grace. I am practical by upbringing. The Dowager set down her cup. Miss Merritt, my son's cousin, Arthur Ravenshaw, wrote to me last week, offering to take up the running of Ashworth in a family capacity. I should like you to hear the offer stated plainly, and to answer me one question. If Mr. Arthur Ravenshaw were to come to Ashworth next month, would you find him useful? Charlotte did not answer at once. She looked at her cup. She looked at the fire. She looked, briefly, at Theodore, and her eyes were as level as the water in the cup. I think, Your Grace, that Mr. Ravenshaw would find the estate in no particular disorder, as I have been keeping it in order since January. A gentleman expecting to be useful in a disorderly household would be disappointed by an orderly one. Beyond that, whether he would be useful is not my question to answer. It is your son's. Theodore? Mamma, said Theodore, with the first smile that had reached his mouth since Monday morning. My cousin Arthur is not coming to Ashworth. I wrote to him on Monday afternoon. I burnt the letter he sent you, and then I wrote him one of my own. It was considerably shorter. I see. The Dowager set down her cup. Miss Merritt, I should like to speak with my son alone, if you would be so kind. Of course, Your Grace. Charlotte rose. She did not look at Theodore. At the door, she paused. Your Grace, Mrs. Gray would like to know when you wish to take your drops this evening. At 9:30, Miss Merritt. Very good, Your Grace. 3, as usual. 3, as usual. She went out. The door shut. The Dowager poured herself a second cup of tea, and, in the small, operatic gesture of a woman who had been outmaneuvered politely and knew it, laughed. Oh, Theodore, what have you done? I do not know yet, Mamma. She is formidable. I know. She is also a steward's daughter. Your father loved her father. Your father did not intend, however, that his son should marry his steward's daughter. That he left open to you, I suspect because he did not anticipate it. Or perhaps he anticipated it perfectly. I have lately come to realize that I knew your father rather less well than I thought. Theodore opened his mouth to protest that no one had said anything about marrying anyone, and then closed it, because he realized, with a slow, cold certainty, that his mother had just said aloud the sentence he had been refusing to say to himself for 3 days. I will say only this, my dear, said the Dowager. I like her. I have not decided yet whether I approve of her, but I like her. I should like you to remember that I said that, whichever way this goes. I was liking her first. I shall remember, Mamma. Good. Now, hand me those drops on the mantel. 3, she said, did she not? 3. How delightful. I've been giving myself 4 for 2 weeks. The loan negotiation with Mr. Pembroke of Thorn Cross took place on a Wednesday in late April, in the Blue Room at Ashworth, with the windows open on a garden that was finally, definitely, spring. Thorn hedges had leafed out. The apple trees in the walled garden had come into rough white bloom. The air smelled of turned earth from the kitchen beds and, faintly, of the river. Mr. Pembroke was 53, stout, silvered about the temples, and had been in 3 minor lawsuits in the past decade that he had mostly won by being more patient than his opponents. He arrived with his solicitor, Mr. Brine, a thin man in a rusty black coat, who looked as though he subsisted entirely on tea and tedium. Charlotte had spent the preceding Tuesday rereading every letter that had ever passed between Ashworth and Pembroke, which came to 41 letters across 2 generations, and every letter between Ashworth and Pembroke's cousin at the bank, which came to 17. Theodore watched her think. It was an unexpected pleasure. Charlotte Merritt thought visibly. The tilt of her head shifted half an inch when Pembroke said something she distrusted, One pale finger tapped, just once, lightly, on the edge of the paper when Brian produced a new clause. And yet she was reading the room like a book, in a language only she and her father had ever spoken. "Mr. Pembroke," she said at the first pause, "I should like to set out what I understand to be the shape of this matter. £40 advanced in January against the spring barley. Repayment due in July. The keeper's cottage at Michaelmas for Robert Pembroke at reduced rent in exchange for patrol of the South Covert. The matter you wish to discuss today, I believe, is the repayment date. You wish to extend it to Michaelmas itself, with the full harvest income in hand." "He did," Mr. Pembroke confirmed. "At no interest, per their agreement," Charlotte continued. "That," Pembroke said, "he left to your Grace and Miss Merritt." "Mr. Pembroke," said Charlotte, and now her eyes did a very small thing, a quarter of an amused flicker. "We shall leave it at no interest, as agreed. We do not renegotiate the terms of a gift. An extension is not a renegotiation." Mr. Pembroke laughed. "Mr." Brian looked pained. "I am glad to be dealing with Miss Merritt. Her father was a fine man. He is a great loss." "He is," said Charlotte. "The extension will be agreed. There is one further matter, however, which is on my side, not yours. The South Covert, since December, has not been patrolled. I mention this only because Robert will find, on taking up his post at Michaelmas, that the work is heavier than either of us anticipated. There has been a run of snares laid by some party from Shaftesbury. I have been removing them myself when I find them. I should like a small additional sum, 20 shillings, set against the cottage rent in Robert's first year. A broken thing should not be handed over as though it were whole." Theodore, beside her, was quiet. He had not known, until she said it, that she had been walking the South Covert in December alone, pulling snares. 20 shillings, said Mr. Pembroke, against his first year's rent. He accepted. "With gratitude, Miss Merritt." "Good," she answered. "Your Grace, may they sign?" "They may," he said. They signed. Mr. Pembroke rose and shook hands with a warmth that would have required 3 more clauses in most men. Mr. Brine, who had evidently expected to argue, gathered his papers in the disappointed manner of a man who had packed an entirely unnecessary lunch. They were seen to the forecourt. They drove away. Theodore and Charlotte returned to the blue room. The windows were still open. "That," said Theodore, "was a remarkable piece of work." It was a routine extension. It was an unlaid snare in a December covert, and 20 shillings of reparations from the estate to a tenant's son who has not yet moved in. He will work better for us if he arrives feeling honoured. He sat down slowly. "Miss Merritt, I have a question, and I shall not phrase it as an instruction. Did you walk the South Covert alone in December, removing snares?" "I did." "How many?" 9, over 4 nights. I did not tell anyone because my father had been laid to rest. You were in London, her Grace was unwell, Mr. Price was in Bath, and the gamekeeper's son is 11. I could remove the snares. I could not, I thought, do more." Theodore sat with that for a moment. "I have an instruction, if you will accept one. You will not walk the South Covert alone at night again. If you see a snare, you will mark it. If you see men, you will ride back and tell me. We will go together, or with 2 men from the village, or not at all. I am asking, in return, that you not leave yourself somewhere I could lose you to a poacher's trap." She looked at him for perhaps 3 seconds. It was the first time since Monday that she had looked directly at him, without the clean surveyor's level in her eyes. "Agreed, Your Grace." "Theodore," he said. She paused. "Not yet, Your Grace." "Of course," he answered. "Forgive him." Miss Merritt. Outside, in the walled garden, the wind moved through the apple blossom, and a handful of white petals drifted past the open blue room window and settled on the oak table between them. The fire broke out in the Whitby cottage on a Saturday night at the end of April, and by the time the first boy ran up from the village, the cottage was half gone. Theodore was in the library, reading a long letter from his London agent, when Harben came in through the service passage without knocking. "Whitby's cottage, Your Grace. Chimney fire, spreading fast." "Who is in it?" "Tom, his wife, the two little ones." "Out?" "Tom out. The wife and the little ones in the yard. Nobody hurt, but the cottage." "I will come." He was on the grey mare in 4 minutes. Charlotte was in the yard as he came out, already in her dark riding habit, already pulling on the indigo riding coat she had worn each morning that winter. "You are not." "I am, Your Grace." "Miss Merritt, it is raining." "Precisely why I should come. Foster, the tarpaulin, the one in the second loft, the large one, bring it. Follow us in the dog-cart." "Miss, I." They rode out together. Rain was coming in off the sea proper now, cold and solid, the particular kind of late April rain that feels like February. The lanes were running with water. The wind bit at their faces. Charlotte's bay was faster than the grey mare. She outpaced him for half a mile and then pulled back, deliberately, so that he could come up alongside, and they rode the last half mile side by side at a canter. The cottage, when they arrived, was a roaring amber shape in the dark. Smoke billowed off the thatch in hot, dark waves, and the smell of burning wood and scorched iron carried on the wind. A bucket chain of neighbours had formed, hopeless and valiant. Their faces were bright with sweat and firelight. The wife was at the far side of the lane, with the two little ones pressed into her skirts, all three of them soaking and miraculously unhurt. Tom Whitby was at the bucket chain, shouting the names of his pigs. Theodore called him through the roar. Tom answered where he was. "The pigs?" Theodore asked. "Still in the sty," Tom said. The sty was clear of the house. "The cottage," the Duke pressed. "Lost," Tom answered. "Only the shell left." "His wife, Nell, Sophie, the baby?" "In the lane. Safe." Charlotte was already off her mare, already at the wife's side, already wrapping her own riding coat, the indigo one, around the smaller of the two children. She was lifting the bigger one against her hip. "Nell, look at me. Look at me. They are safe. You are safe. Tom is there. Look, Tom. He is there. Breathe. Now. Breathe." Nell was whispering names of lost things, her pots, her letters, Gran's box, and Charlotte told her, gently, without flinching, that those were gone. "But you are not, and Tom is not, and Sophie is not, and the baby is not. That is what survived. Come." She led them across the lane to the leeward side of the ruined byre, where the wind was still cold, but the rain could not find them. She sat Nell Whitby down on a dry patch of earth beneath the low stone overhang. She put the bigger child down in the woman's lap. She kept the smaller one against her own body, inside what remained of her riding coat. She looked, the whole time, as though she had done this before. She had not. She had simply imagined it enough times alone in the east corridor, in the small hours of the winter nights. And when it came, she had walked into it. Theodore spent the next hour at the bucket chain with Tom. By the end, his coat was heavy with water, and his shoulders ached, the copper bucket handle leaving a raw, red line across both palms. By the end, the cottage was a hissing black frame, the smoke still rising bitter off wet embers. By the end, the rain had turned to a fine, steady drizzle, and dawn was a grey line over the orchard. Foster arrived at some point with the dog-cart and the tarpaulin. Charlotte organised the tarpaulin into a shelter over the byre overhang, so that the family could spend the remaining hour of the night beneath it, with two of Theodore's own dry cloaks Foster had thought to bring, and with one of the kitchen maids, summoned he never discovered how, arriving at the end with hot broth in a covered pot. The steam rose off the pot in a thin, sweet column. It was past 6 in the morning when he walked to her. She was standing at the byre corner, looking back at the burn site. The smaller child had at last been coaxed out of her coat and was asleep on her mother's breast. Charlotte's pale gold hair had come all the way down, was, in fact, halfway down her back, was clinging wet to her neck. The indigo riding coat was gone, given to Nell, he realized, and Charlotte was in only her shirt and habit, soaked through, arms bare to the elbow. She was shaking. Not visibly. He could feel it when he stood beside her. A small, continuous tremor in her whole body, from cold and not from anything else. She had not asked for anything. He took off his own coat. The wool was warm still with the heat of his body. "Put this on. You will freeze." "I have been at a bucket chain for an hour. I am not cold. Put it on, Miss Merritt." She hesitated. Then she turned, slightly, and he placed the coat around her shoulders, and his fingers brushed the nape of her neck where the wet hair was. Her skin was cold. His fingers were warm. Only for an instant. His hand did not settle. He was careful. He was so careful that he noticed himself being careful. She did not move. Neither did he. He could feel her breath on the cold morning air, faint and uneven. The Whitbys, he told her after a moment, would sleep at the manor tonight. All of them. Tomorrow they would begin to rebuild the cottage, before anything else on this estate. Tom would want to work on it himself. He would, she agreed, and he was not to stop him. He would not. A pause. "Charlotte," he said quietly. "Your Grace." "Thank you for coming out." She would have come out, she told him, if the Dowager Duchess of Ashworth had forbidden it. He knew. "Thank you." She turned her head to look at him for the first time since they had arrived. Her face was streaked with soot and rain. Her grey eyes had in them, for the first time since Monday, something that was not level. "Your Grace," she told him. She was going to be called Charlotte by him eventually. She was not ready yet. She would tell him when. He would wait, Miss Merritt, he said. She knew he would. They rode home in the morning mist together. Neither spoke for the first mile. For the second mile, he told her, at her request, a story about his first cavalry horse, which had been called Tuppence, and which had once eaten the Earl of Morton's entire hat at a review. Charlotte laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, open. A laugh that went all the way to her eyes. The sound of it, in the wet dawn, was the clearest thing he had heard that week, and he understood, riding beside her with both their coats steaming in the rising light, that he was absolutely, unconditionally, irretrievably going to have to marry this woman, if she would ever let him ask. He did not tell her so. He had been instructed not to speak to her in private. He rode home beside her and said nothing. The spring ball at Graven Park was held, by long tradition, on the last Saturday in May. Ashworth and Graven had exchanged balls for 4 generations. The Gravens hosted in spring, the Ashworths hosted in autumn. The Dowager had, since her widowhood, attended every spring ball she had been in England. This year she would attend with her son. She would attend, she informed Theodore at breakfast on Tuesday, in her lavender silk, because the plum would overdress the Gravens. Theodore had a tailor down from Dorchester. He was fitted for a coat of deep indigo superfine wool with silver-grey waistcoat. His mother had, that Tuesday morning, asked him with unusual casualness what colour Miss Merritt's only evening dress was. "She does not have an evening dress, Mamma." "She will by Thursday, dear. Mrs. Peake, the dressmaker from Shaftesbury, will come tomorrow. It is to be a gift from me. I intend to introduce Miss Merritt to Lady Graven and to half the county, and she will not be introduced in a day dress." "Miss Merritt will not accept a gift of that kind." "She will accept it from me, Theodore, if I frame it correctly. Leave it with me." He left it with his mother. She framed it correctly, apparently, because on Thursday afternoon Mrs. Peake came and went with samples, and by Saturday morning there was hanging in Charlotte's room a dress the colour of good ruby, a deep, clear red that had in it the echo of stained glass at evensong, with a high-waisted fall and short sleeves, and a white lace fichu at the throat. Charlotte rode with them in the closed carriage to Graven Park. She did not speak in the carriage. She sat across from the dowager and looked out of the window at the evening light over the graven beeches. At Graven Park, the footman opened the carriage door. The dowager stepped out first. Theodore stepped out second. Charlotte stepped out third, last, without taking any offered hand, in the way of a woman who was not a guest, but a member of the household. Theodore saw her, in the doorway lantern's light, for the first time that evening. He forgot, briefly, what he had been going to say to his mother. Charlotte was a tall woman, but the ruby dress made her taller. It also made her, with the simplest possible grace, the most visible person in the courtyard. She wore no jewels except a thin gold chain of her mother's at her throat. Her pale gold hair was pinned in a smooth coil with a single matching ruby-colored ribbon through it. As she passed Theodore at the door, she said, not glancing at him, that he was not to stare. The dowager would notice. "She already has," he answered under his breath. "Then stop." He was trying. Try harder. She went in. He followed. Inside the Graven ballroom, there were already some 60 people. Lady Graven, a small, round woman of perhaps 50, met the dowager with the clasped hands of an old friend. Her elder daughter, Lady Eliza Graven, tall, dark, green-eyed, in an emerald gown of very expensive cut and a quantity of emeralds at her throat that suggested a family more confident of its land than of its cash, curtsied also, and, in the tone of a young woman who had been told for 5 years that she would one day be Duchess of Ashworth, and who was not yet prepared to abandon the expectation, said brightly, "Your Grace, we had almost despaired of you." "Lady Eliza, forgive me the long absence." "Of course, Your Grace. And—" "Oh." Her eyes had found Charlotte. Her eyes had stopped there. She did not, for a fraction of a second, know what she was looking at. Then she did. And what she did was perhaps the smallest possible thing. She smiled. "He was in company tonight, Your Grace," she observed. "Indeed," said the dowager, with the maternal dryness that was now perfectly audible to her son. And she begged leave to present Miss Charlotte Merritt, the factor of Ashworth Estate, and a near friend of their household, to Lady Eliza Graven. "Miss Merritt." Lady Eliza's smile was exquisite. She had practiced it. What an interesting title. The factor. One hears of factors. I did not realize one would meet one at a ball. "I believe," said Charlotte, with a perfectly level curtsy, "this is only the 3rd time a factor of Ashworth has attended Graven Park. I understand your ladyship's grandfather met my own grandfather here on 2 occasions, both spring balls. Your grandfather was a great admirer of his. The estates have been friends for longer than either of them." The smile on Lady Eliza did not waver. It did, however, develop a certain rigidity about the corners. "How gratifying," she murmured. She must hear more later. Then, brightly, might she present the rest of the company to his grace? Her father had been longing to speak to him. She led Theodore away. Charlotte moved with the dowager deeper into the room. Theodore danced the first 2 sets with the young Gravens, the elder twice. He danced a third with a Miss Bowen of Fawley, who was 17 and terrified. He drank a glass of inferior claret. He made half an hour of duty conversation with Lord Graven about the turnpike bill. He watched Charlotte, with Lady Eliza watching him watching her, and he could not help it. And by the 4th set, he understood that everyone in the ballroom could see it as plainly as he did. At the 4th set, he went to Charlotte. "Miss Merritt, will you take the floor?" "Your Grace, I should be delighted." He bowed. She curtsied. He offered his hand. She took it. They walked to the head of the set, under the full attention of the Graven ballroom. "You are aware," he murmured, as they took their places, "that there will be talk." "I am aware, Your Grace, that there will be talk no matter what you do. I am also aware that Lady Eliza is watching us and that she will say something before the night is over." "What will she say?" "Something about the factor at a ball, something about service, something light and sharp. I shall apologize to her in advance. Also, by implication, to you again. Apologize to no one in advance, Your Grace. You apologize quite well in arrears. The music began. They took the first figure. Charlotte's hand in his was cool, light, certain. Her grey eyes, as they passed each other in the turn, held the first look she had given him in private. That is to say, in the middle of a ballroom with 70 people watching. That was not the level look of a woman running an estate. It was also not, yet, the look of a woman in love. It was the look of a woman who had not yet decided, and who was allowing him, briefly, in the interval of a dance, to see her not deciding. It would be enough, Theodore thought, for the rest of his life. The set was halfway through when Lady Eliza spoke. She spoke from the side of the floor to Miss Bowen, but in a voice that was not a low voice. "I do think it charming," she said, "of His Grace to bring someone from the staff tonight. It is so democratic. One wonders if the housekeeper will come in next year." Miss Bowen went pale. Several other heads turned. The Dowager's 3 friends all turned, in unison, like geese. Theodore felt, through his palm, the infinitesimal tightening of Charlotte's fingers in his. Then he felt her release them. She murmured to him, without looking at him under the music, that he was not to speak to her. She would not. Say nothing. The dance was the answer. Finish the dance. He finished the dance. At the end of it, he bowed, extremely formally, over Charlotte's hand. Then he crossed the floor to Lady Eliza, who was standing with her back very straight beside a potted plant. "Lady Eliza." "Your Grace." "You spoke a remark a few minutes ago which I am confident you did not intend to reach me. I am, however, obliged to take notice of it. The lady who has honoured me with the last set is the factor of Ashworth, and a guest of my mother's. I shall not hear her spoken of as staff by any person, anywhere, tonight or later, without consequence. You are the daughter of my oldest family friend. I say this to you with all the respect that fact is owed, and no less, and no more. I shall not raise the matter again." Lady Eliza's eyes were very green. She did not answer. "I bid you good evening, Lady Eliza." He bowed. She curtsied. He walked away. The Dowager, from the far side of the room, inclined her head very slightly to him. Charlotte, who was already with Lady Graven, did not look at him at all, which he took, correctly, as approval. At 10 in the evening, he found her on the terrace off the orangery. She had stepped out to take a breath of air, she said, and had taken 2, and was now going back in. The orangery was lit by a single oil lantern hung on an iron hook above the door, and the spring night was cool and perfectly clear, and the smell of the graven orange trees was sharp and green. "Miss Merritt," he began. "Your Grace." He was not asking. He was only saying. "Theodore," she said for the first time. Yes. She would release him from the rule. For tonight. Charlotte. Yes. He kissed her under the orangery lantern. He kissed her once, carefully, because he had been waiting for the permission to do so for nearly a month, and he did not intend to squander the first instance. The silk of her dress was cool under his fingers. Her breath was warm. She kissed him back. Her hand came up to the side of his face. Her palm was cool against his jaw. Her mouth was warmer than he had expected, and more certain than he had dared to hope. The air smelled of orange leaves and cold stone and, faintly, of the wax of the single lantern. When he lifted his head, she said, once, "Yes, for tonight." Yes. They were not yet. He knew. Good. She went back into the ballroom. He remained on the terrace for another minute, leaning against the iron railing, looking up at the cold stars over Dorset, and he thought, I am 30 years late to this conversation. I am going to have it now. The dowager summoned him to her sitting room on the morning after the ball at 10:30. He went. She was in a grey satin morning gown, drinking a second cup of tea, with a letter open in her hand, of which the writing was angular and purplish, and which he recognized at 20 feet as his cousin Arthur's. She greeted him by name. He greeted her by hers. "Sit down, please," she told him. He sat. "Last night," said the dowager, "you kissed a woman on the terrace at Graven Park." Mamma, I am not reproaching you. I saw it from the upper gallery. I am, in fact, glad of it. You have been difficult since you were 15, and it is pleasant to see you doing a thing a man ought to do. However, that is not what we are going to talk about. What we are going to talk about is this letter. From Arthur. She summarized it for him. Arthur proposed, with his usual fluency and his usual complete absence of taste, to act on their family's behalf in a matter he believed was pressing. He had written to her and to the family solicitor, Mr. Rowntree, simultaneously. He had made the case that Theodore was, his phrase, seduced by a servant, and that the interests of the family required intervention. His word, not mine. I think it an ugly word, and I have told Arthur so in the past, but he is fond of it. He had attached a suggestion that she withhold a portion of the trust left to Theodore by his grandfather. You may recall the trust. It is substantial. It is, in fact, about a third of the estate's unencumbered income. The trust instrument allows me, as life trustee, to withhold income from the beneficiary, namely you, if, in my judgment as trustee, the beneficiary is conducting his affairs in a manner contrary to the family's long interest. That provision has never been invoked. Arthur, who has studied the instrument as one studies a scripture, wishes me to invoke it. On the grounds, he asked? On the grounds, Theodore, that he was intending to marry the wrong woman. He began, he does not dare, and she cut him off. He did. It was an error of judgment on his part, but he did. What, then, had she replied? He asked. She had not yet replied, she said. That was why he was sitting in her drawing room at 10:30. She would reply today. But she wished to reply in his presence, and she wished to reply with his own view clear to her, because she was about to take a step that would be irreversible. What step? I shall tell him, said the dowager, that the trust instrument will remain untouched in your lifetime, that Ashworth will not, under any circumstances, be run by any Ravenshaw but you, and that he will marry whom you choose and whom you love, and that whomever you choose, if she is Charlotte Merritt, will be welcome in this house for as long as I have lungs to breathe in it. I shall copy Mr. Rowntree. I shall copy the Earl of Morton. I shall copy Lady Graven. And I shall, Theodore, sign this letter before supper this evening. Theodore was quiet for some seconds. Mamma. Yes, dear. She was warning him, he said. She was warning him, she answered, that if she signed this letter, Arthur would make it his life's work to be a nuisance, that Lady Graven would be bitterly disappointed for a year and then reconcile, and that half the county would be divided about the match for some months. She was warning him that there would be a cost. She was not warning him out of it. She was telling him the cost before he paid it. And Charlotte, he said quietly. Would he like to marry her, Theodore? Yes. Did he love her? Yes. Had he told her? No. Why not? Because, he answered, he had not yet been given permission to say her Christian name in private. Because she had told him she would decide when. Because he was waiting for her. The dowager set down her teacup. She looked at her son with the full, unambiguous face of a woman who had been a mother for 28 years, and was only now, at last, beginning to be allowed to approve of the result. That, she told him, was the best single sentence he had ever said to her. Go and find her. Tell her she had signed the letter, not that she had told him to tell her. Charlotte had a right to know the shape of what was coming, so that she might decide whether she wanted to stand under it. "Go, Mama," he answered, and he loved her. "Yes, dear, go." He went. He found Charlotte in the library, at the oak desk, in the grey-blue morning dress she wore for ledger work. She was writing a letter. She set down her pen when he came in. "Your Grace." He closed the door behind him. He did not come up to the desk. He stood in the middle of the room on the faded Turkish carpet his grandfather had carried home from a campaign in 1765.
"Charlotte. Theodore."
"My mother is writing a letter this afternoon, which will be delivered to my cousin Arthur, the family solicitor, the Earl of Morton, and Lady Graven. The letter states that she will not invoke the trust provision against me, that Ashworth will not be managed by any Ravenshaw other than me, that I shall marry whom I love, and that if I marry you, you will be Duchess of Ashworth and welcome at her table for as long as she has breath." He was quiet. Charlotte had not looked away. "I should like, however, to make clear to you before she signs that letter what the shape of the next 6 months will be. My cousin Arthur will be a difficulty. Lady Graven will be offended. Lady Eliza will be furious and will recover. Half the county will be divided. Mr. Pembroke and Tom Whitby and Foster will be on our side, which, I now realize, is what actually matters. I shall lose none of my income and a portion of my reputation. My mother will support us absolutely. I am telling you this because I want you to know the full shape of it before she signs, and because you have been running this estate alone long enough." "Was that all, Your Grace?" she asked quietly. "No. What else?" "I love you, Charlotte Merritt." It was the first time he had said it to anyone in his life. It fell into the library air, the way a stone falls into still water. One sound, clean, inarguable, generating rings. Charlotte stood up from the desk. "Your Grace," she said, and he could hear, very faintly, the tremor at the back of her voice. "I have something to tell you also. I would have left on Monday morning. I would have taken the grey mare, and I would not have come back. I had decided it in the courtyard before you even spoke. You had been in London for 3 months and home for 40 minutes, and you had not. You had not even seen that I was there. I was packing a bag of 3 years of my life in 4 minutes. I was doing it so that I would not feel anything. Your sentence in the courtyard. It was not the worst thing you did to me. The worst thing was that you had not yet looked at me. The sentence was only the flag that said so. When you stood in my doorway and asked me not to leave, that was the first time a Duke of Ashworth had asked me anything in my life. I stopped packing in my mind at exactly the moment you said you could not move. Charlotte, I wish to marry you. I wish it now, without stages. I'm not asking for time. I've had 4 months of time. I've had more time than you. But I will tell you the terms under which I will marry you, and they are not the terms of a factor. They are the terms of a wife. We sign every important thing together, all of it, the big ledger and the small one. I am not your ornament, and I am not your steward, and I am not your rescue, and I am not your mistake. I am your partner, Theodore Ravenshaw. That is the only thing I will be, and I will be it absolutely. If that does not suit you, tell me now, and I shall stay 6 months, and I shall leave. If it does, tell me now also. Say it so I hear it. Yes, he said. Yes, what? She answered. Yes, they signed every important thing together. Yes, she was his partner. Yes, absolutely. Yes, Charlotte. She came round the desk. She came to him in the middle of the faded Turkish carpet. Her fingers found his hand. His pulse was quick under her thumb. Say my name again, she whispered. Charlotte. Again. Charlotte. Once more. Charlotte. Then she kissed him, without asking permission, without hesitation, without any of the careful, level composure she had worn like armor since January. And for the first time in the 4 months he had not been watching, she was, absolutely, visibly, unhiddenly in love with him, and he with her, and everything that had been running underneath the surface of the estate since Monday morning, at last rose to meet the surface. And they stood together in the middle of the library of Ashworth, and it was perfectly, finally, unmistakably spring. 3 months later, at the end of August, Charlotte came down into the kitchen at Ashworth on a warm morning, with a letter from the bank in her hand. The kitchen was cool. It was the coolest room in the house, and the flagstones were dark with the water the scullery maid had just finished throwing across them. The window above the long, scrubbed table stood open on the south garden. Beyond it, the hedgerow was heavy with green, the hawthorn of April, long gone into leaf, already shaping the first small red haws of autumn. She sat down at the kitchen table. Mrs. Parish set tea before her without being asked. Mrs. Parish was one of the 3 women in the house at that moment who had noticed, without comment, that Her Grace the new Duchess of Ashworth was expecting a child. The ceremony in the village church had been, in the end, the smallest possible affair. The Dowager, Tom Whitby, and Nell, Foster, the Pembrokes, Mr. Harben, Mrs. Gray, Mrs. Parish, and a great many of the tenants who had walked up the hill to stand outside because they had not been invited in and had come anyway. Lady Graven had sent flowers, handsomely. Lady Eliza, to universal surprise, had come and sat in the second pew with a perfect smile, and had said something at the door afterwards that Charlotte had received gracefully, and that Theodore, watching, had realized was a genuine, if belated, apology. Cousin Arthur had not come. It had not mattered. Theodore came into the kitchen behind her with a boot full of the south garden on his boot. He was not to walk in the house in such boots, and he knew he was not to, and he had done it anyway, because he had been coming in from the south covert where he had spent the morning with Foster. He put the boot on the stone hearth, where it would do less damage, and came to the table. From the bank, he asked, nodding at the letter. From the bank, she answered. Mr. Pembroke's repayment, made in full, 1 month early, without comment or apology or interest. £40 returned. A note saying his cousin at the bank sent his regards to the Duchess and had recommended them to a new client in Shaftesbury. He loved her handling of Mr. Pembroke, he said. She loved his handling of Mr. Pembroke, she answered. She had merely negotiated him. He had kept him. Charlotte, he said after a moment. Yes. The ledger was on the desk in the library, the big one. He should like them to sign the August entries together before supper. After supper, Theodore. She was having her tea. After supper, then. She had set the small ledger out as well. She wanted his signature on the Foster wage adjustment. He had earned it, and he was too shy to ask for it. Done, Theodore answered. He sat down across from her. He took a piece of the morning's bread. He pulled it apart. He looked at her without saying anything for perhaps 20 seconds. Theodore, she said without looking up. Yes. He was staring. He knew. Stop. The Dowager would notice. The Dowager had known for 3 weeks and was pretending not to, she told him. Be quiet. Eat your bread. He ate his bread. Through the open kitchen window came the sound of a tenant's cart on the lower lane, a blackbird settling into the hedgerow, the soft crack of hawthorn haws beginning to redden in their clusters. Spring was long gone. The estate had survived it. So had they. Outside, in the stable yard, where she had once asked Foster for the grey mare, the grey mare now grazed unsaddled in the paddock behind the kitchen garden, and the door between the kitchen and the south garden stood wide open to the warm August air. It had always been open. It had only been waiting for both of them to walk through it together. If you have made it with me to the end of this story, thank you. Tell me in the comments what you would have said if you had been standing in Charlotte's doorway that April morning. I promise I read every one. And if this fireside suits you, please take a moment to subscribe. I have another story ready for you next week.